So as I think about this story, as I think about David, it reminds me of my childhood. In my childhood, one of the things I wanted more than anything was to be tall. And I think we've had that experience as a kid. For me, it was probably going to the fairgrounds, or some of you may remember Liberty Land in Memphis, or going to Six Flags. And you go as a kid, and you're really excited, and you see the ride that you want to get on. And you see that ride, but you also see the sign that says you must be this tall to ride this ride. And you get to that point, and unfortunately, whoever you're with says, sorry, bud, you're going to have to be older. You're not tall enough to do this. As a kid, that's so devastating because you don't care. I mean, you don't care about your safety. You just want to ride that ride. It looks fun. You want to be on it. But you hear those words, you get frustrated. But eventually, right, I got to the point where, okay, I can ride that ride. But it didn't stop there with me. I still just wanted to be tall. Everybody I saw on TV, I was big into sports, so the basketball players, tall. The football players, tall. And just anybody I saw in life that was, I guess, abnormally tall, it seemed like people were just like in awe of them as they walked around. So that was what I wanted. And by the time I got to 7th grade, I thought, man, this might happen. I was this tall. In 7th grade, I had size like 12 and a half feet, and everybody was like, you're going to be a giant. And I was like, yes, this is going to be awesome. But I stopped growing. So everybody in high school caught up with me and eventually passed me. It was really disappointing. And, my family, they were really generous and kind. My uncle, he had a growth spurt in college, and they were like, just hold out. It may come. So I didn't drink coffee until I was a junior in college because, I always heard if you drink coffee, it stunts your growth. So I was like, can't do that. I got growth. So that never happened for me, but there's that frustration we all experience, I think. And we all know this dirty secret in life that appearance matters. And we don't want it to matter, but it matters. And we all know this. I was thinking about how we choose our candidates for president or whatever else. Appearance matters. And you've probably heard this story before, but one of the first televised debates was between John F. Kennedy and Richard Nixon, and this was in 1960. And so a little backstory, Nixon, a month before, he had injured his knee. He got an infection in his knee, so he had to go to the hospital. He ended up losing a lot of weight, but he made a recovery, and he was going to be on track to be on TV for the debate. But then he had a fever, and he was going through the flu. So his just appearance when he was on TV, he just looked kind of weak. And you take that compared to Kennedy, he was young, he was lively, and whenever they asked questions to Kennedy, he looked at the camera, so it looked like he was looking at people at home and speaking to them. Whereas when they asked Nixon questions, he was looking at the reporters and he was looking off to the side. So what was interesting about that is they polled people who watched the TV debate and they polled people who listened on the radio. Those who listened on the radio said that it was probably a tie or Nixon maybe won the debate. But those who watched on TV, it was a landslide. They all said Kennedy won. It just goes to show that appearance matters a lot in our society. But the good news is that the Lord does not look at the things people look at. And many of you know where I'm going with this story, but in case you don't, let me catch you up to speed. So Israel wanted a king. They wanted to be like the other nations. They asked God for a king, and Samuel was against it, but God said, give them what they want. I'll give them a king. So God picked out this man named Saul, and Saul, he looked the part. The Bible actually says that he was one of the most handsome of men that could be found anywhere. And Saul was actually apprehensive. They had to pull him out from behind some stuff he was hiding. But when he came out, the people looked at him, and he was a head taller than everybody around him. And everybody was like, oh, he's going to be the king? This is great. Look at him. He's awesome. Well, Saul made some bad choices, and he started to deviate from what God wanted him to be as king. So God said, we're going to have a new king. But in the meantime, still Saul is there, but everybody knows that Saul's kind of on the way out, and God's looking to the future. So that's where we begin, 1 Samuel 16, and I'm just going to start by reading the first 5 verses. The Lord said to Samuel, "How long will you mourn for Saul, since I have rejected him as king over Israel? Fill your horn with oil and be on your way. I am sending you to Jesse of Bethlehem. I've chosen one of his sons to be king." But Samuel said, "How can I go? If Saul hears about it, he will kill me." The Lord said, "Take a heifer with you and say, I have come to sacrifice to the Lord. Invite Jesse to the sacrifice, and I will show you what to do. You are to anoint for me the one I indicate." Samuel did what the Lord said. When he arrived at Bethlehem, the elders of the town trembled when they met him. They asked, "Do you come in peace?" Samuel replied, "Yes, in peace. I've come to sacrifice to the Lord. Consecrate yourselves and come to the sacrifice with me." Then he consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. So Samuel's in a precarious situation here. God has given him a task to anoint a new king, but immediately Saul has not been thinking straight. He's already been violent, and he's upset about the whole situation. So Samuel's thinking, if I go do this, Saul's going to kill me as soon as he finds out about this. And I think to appease Samuel's worry, God says, well, okay, if that's really your worry, then what I want you to do is I want you to take a cow with you and go and sacrifice. But when you get there, I want you to invite this family, invite Jesse and his family to come to the sacrifice. Now, what's funny is when Samuel shows up to Bethlehem, everybody's worried. And they say, "Hey, do you come in peace?" Because think about it. Samuel is this authority figure, right? He represents the king. He represents God. So they don't know if they're about to receive some bad news from the king. Saul has not been himself lately. Maybe Saul is going to come and he's going to, enlist them in some battle they don't want to be a part of. Or maybe there's some sin in their community that God has told Samuel to come and talk about with them. So they want to, hey, are you coming in peace? He says, yes, I'm coming in peace, and I've come to sacrifice, gather the elders, and I want you to gather a family for me. I want you to gather the family of Jesse and invite them. So, there's a small detail in here that I want us to pay attention to. It says that Jesse and his family were invited, and at the very tail end it says, then he, talking about Samuel, consecrated Jesse and his sons and invited them to the sacrifice. The reason this is important is that if you look in Leviticus or you look in Exodus, consecration was about preparing yourself basically to be in God's presence. So that meant cleaning yourself outwardly, washing your clothes, taking a bath, making sure things were right. We don't have all the details of what they did, but they would have had to do something like that to prepare for this sacrifice. So they are preparing for probably the biggest event of their lives right now. These boys are. They're getting dressed up. They're getting spiffied up. Mom's checking them, right? Checking their clothes for spots. Dad's saying, hey, make sure when you get in there, stand up straight, right? Make eye contact. This is important, what we're about to do. Maybe the biggest thing that you could be a part of in your life. So get ready for it. Meanwhile, David isn't invited. David isn't invited. He isn't consecrated. I imagine it being like this. David comes to his dad and says, hey, what's going on? What are y'all doing? Well, we're getting ready for this sacrifice. Hey, well, can I go? I see all the other guys, they're getting ready for this. Sorry, son, you're not quite ready for this yet. You're not big enough, but when we come back, we'll tell you about it. Maybe in a couple years, you can get an opportunity like this. And David probably hangs his head, walks off. And then he sees his family, his brothers, they're all dressed up and they're walking down the road. And they're ready to go. And David eventually loses sight of him and he's out there with the sheep. He's like, man, this stinks. I'm with all these sheep. And they're out there doing that. So when they come together, when Samuel sees the sons, this is what happens next. Verse 6. When they arrived, Samuel saw Eliab and thought, surely the Lord's anointed stands here before the Lord. But the Lord said to Samuel, do not consider his appearance or his height, for I have rejected him. The Lord does not look at the things people look at. People look at the outward appearance, but the Lord looks at the heart. Then Jesse called Abinadab and had him pass in front of Samuel. But Samuel said, the Lord has not chosen this one either. Jesse then had Shammah pass by, but Samuel said, nor has the Lord chosen this one. Jesse had 7 of his sons pass before Samuel, but Samuel said to him, the Lord has not chosen these. So can you imagine Samuel's shock? All of these guys, the first one he sees and he thinks, this has got to be him. I mean, look at this guy. That's got to be him. And he passes before him. God says, nope, that's not him. You're looking at the outward appearance, but I'm looking for something different. I don't look at things that you look at. And on and on and on, these boys walk in front of Samuel, and they all look perfect. They all look good from the outside eye. They're dressed up. They're clean. They're consecrated. But every single one of them passes by. And then there's kind of a funny exchange that we see next. So he asked Jesse, are these all the sons you have? Jesse says, they're still the youngest. He's tending the sheep. Send for him. We will not sit down until he arrives. So he sent for him and had him brought in. He was glowing with health and had a fine appearance and handsome features. Then the Lord said, rise and anoint him. This is the one. So Samuel took the horn of oil and anointed him in the presence of his brothers. And from that day on, the Spirit of the Lord came powerfully upon David. Samuel then went to Ramah. So, these are all the sons you got, really? God has passed over all of them. There's got to be somebody out there. Jesse says, well, we've got the one. He's out with the sheep. Bring him in here now. Nobody's sitting down until David gets in here. Here comes David, smelling like a sheep, walking into the presence, this formal dinner, right? This formal occasion. Everybody else is dressed up and nice. And here's David. He's all dirtied up, smelling like the sheep. And he's like, what's going on? God says, that's him. That's the guy I want. Anoint David. He's anointed. He receives the Spirit. And he's empowered by God. See, God doesn't have a height requirement. He has a heart requirement. It's about your heart. He's looking for your heart. Especially speaking to Sophie and the other young people today in the audience, Jesus said that the pure in heart will see God. There's no age requirement on that. If you have a pure heart, you are able to see what God is doing. You're able to see God, have a relationship with God. And your life could look like you've been out wrestling with the sheep, and other people could look much better than you, but God is looking for your heart. And if you're willing to accept that, He's also willing to, like He did David, empower you with His Spirit. So here are two things I think we can do to help walk in that direction. Because although this is God's call and what he desires for us, it also takes obedience on our part. God has created those good works, but we also have to walk in those good works. So the first thing that we can do is to listen to a spiritual influencer. So I don't necessarily mean someone on Instagram or Facebook, but I mean someone that you know personally, that you would like to have their qualities spiritually. They've raised you, taught you the Bible, taught you how to pray. They've listened to you and the struggles maybe that you've experienced. And maybe this is someone in your family. Maybe it's somebody outside of your family. Preferably, there's someone who has had experience in the faith. They're maybe a couple decades older than you. But have somebody who can speak the truth into your life. Okay? I'm sure when Samuel said, David, you're going to be king, he thought, there's no way. How is that possible? Yet Samuel knew what God was doing. And that spiritual influencer in your life is in touch with what God is doing and knows you and can call out and say what God is doing in your life. I've probably shared this story before, but when I was in college, on a Wednesday night, I was talking with my grandmother, and she said, Hunter, I think you'd make a good youth minister. And in my head, I said, that's crazy. But in some ways, she was right. And that stuck in the back of my head. For whatever reason, it stuck in the back of my head. Now, good is debatable, but I am a youth minister. And you probably have somebody in your life who is willing to speak God's truth into your life about what he is calling you to do as well. So, Sophie, be open to those spiritual influences. They might not be as crazy as you think. And then second, have a name worth mentioning. We shortly find after chapter 16, just a little bit down from what we read, that Saul was going through it, and he wanted someone to be there to play him music to soothe him. And one of his servants says, I have seen a son of Jesse of Bethlehem who knows how to play the lyre. He is a brave man and a warrior. He speaks well and is fine looking, and the Lord is with him. This whole time, David's probably been playing for the sheep, but word of his ability and who he is as a man has traveled up to people, and he's about to be playing for the king. So your passions and your interests, the things you're doing now that you probably think, oh, this is nothing at all, this is just for fun, God could use that in the future. That's what he used for David. So don't neglect your hobbies, your passions, your interests, because God is willing to use those things. And you could be the person, because of your talent, to take the Lord with you to so many people, if you're willing. God is willing to use those things. So make sure you do everything you do with excellence, knowing that God could use it for his purpose and for his glory. So I just want to ask you, as we close this morning, to think about where your heart is, where God is calling you. And maybe you've been scared to answer that call. I would encourage you, if that's you, to consider that he equipped David. He empowered him by the Spirit to do what he wanted done. So I invite you, if you have a need this morning, to come as we stand and we sing.